her big sister Yara, aged 9. 3 Palestinian children killed in an Israeli airstrike.
Shame.
The Israeli military murdered 63 other children and 245 Palestinians in its recent assault on Gaza.
Shame.
The call for Palestinian freedom has never been louder, but this Conservative government is complicit in its denial. It has approved more than £400 million in arms to Israel since 2015. So can the Prime Minister look me in the eye and tell me that British-made weapons or components weren't used in the war crimes that killed these 3 children and hundreds of other Palestinians?
Prime Minister, we shouldn't use props, just to remind members.
Mr. Speaker, I think that the whole House understands that nobody wants to see any more of the conflict, of the appalling conflict that we've seen in Israel and Gaza.
To suggest that there are 2 sides to this story is utterly perverse. To suggest that Israel is simply defending itself is an obscenity, and shame on anyone, on any so-called world leader, wherever they are, if they repeat such an obscenity. The truth is that the international community has seen what has happened to the Palestinian people in full sight and in full view, and they have stepped back and allowed this to happen. So to the UN Security Council, to the entire apparatus of the international community, let me say this, that we see you. Your people and your population see you. And whereas the great and the good of the international community may find it acceptable to step back and make an argument of the one hand this and on the other hand that, and meanwhile Palestinian refugee children die, make no mistake that that is not an acceptable position to the people of the world. I feel confident that global citizens are appalled and repulsed and enraged, quite frankly, that here we are again and Palestine suffers. So yes, we need a cessation, and that needs to happen immediately. And yes, we need a full-scale humanitarian effort. But above all else, let's be clear, we need justice. We need the rule of law to prevail. We need Palestinian self-determination. We need the state of Israel to be finally called out for what it is, a racist apartheid regime. And we in Ireland, perhaps more than any other people, have a special obligation to act on all of this, because we know the colonial experience, the experience of dispossession and division. We know what it is to be left destitute. So we have no excuse not to act. So Minister Coveney and your government, when will we recognise the state of Palestine? That has been agreed in this Parliament years ago. When will we see the occupied territories legislation advanced? And when will we finally insist loudly, clearly and consistently that the law be respected and that Palestinian lives matter?
Pakistan's Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi has called on the United Nations to deploy a protective force to stop Israeli aggression against the Palestinians. I sat down with the Foreign Minister to talk about his plans to hold Israel accountable for its actions. I'm Frank Uciardo, and this is TRT World One-on-One Express. Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi, thank you for joining us here on TRT World. You gave an impassioned speech before the General Assembly. Tell us more about that.
Well, the world has seen what's going on. People who were silent, people who were sitting on the fence were jolted to react.
You were, I'm sure, right?
Everybody was. Everybody was. Nobody could expect the reaction that you saw. Nobody could expect that from the 27th of Ramadan, things will take such a shape that the OIC would be galvanized into action, the Arab League would be galvanized, NAM would be mobilized, and it would result in a special emergency session of the General Assembly. An unprecedented session has taken place today. 103 people registered to speak today. This is unusual. I think the Security Council will no longer be in a position to fudge on the issue. They will have to take a decision. People who believe in fundamental rights, they must speak up. They cannot sit on the fence anymore because enough is enough. And I think today's session will send a very clear message to the Security Council.
As far as concrete action that you want the General Assembly to take and the Security Council to take and the Secretary General to take, what can they do now to stop this?
The first thing they need to do is get a ceasefire. That's the first thing. My coming here, the first one-point agenda that I have is cessation of hostilities and ceasefire. Once that has been achieved, the rest will flow from it.
Well, you also talked about some kind of international protection force, didn't you? Tell us about that.
Well, we are meeting the foreign ministers, OIC foreign ministers who are here today, physically here in New York. We'll be meeting the President of the General Assembly, and there we will be talking, we'll be floating the idea. Pakistan did, Turkey has done as well, and we will be floating this idea and we will be discussing the modalities of that with the President of the General Assembly.
How accountable do you hold the U.S. for enabling Israel?
Well, the only power that they would listen to is the United States. You know, United States has influence over them, and they should play a more active role in convincing them that what they are doing is not acceptable to the world.
In terms of what we're going to see now, there's a lot that's going on in your region. How important is Turkey's role in keeping stability in your part of the world right now?
Turkey wants to see the peace process move forward. So do we. So does the world. So does US and the Afghan people.
Mr. Minister, there is a sad parallel between Indian-occupied Kashmir and what's happening with the Palestinians, isn't there?
Look at the similarities. What are people in Kashmir demanding? Right to self-determination. So are the Palestinians. What are people in Kashmir crying about is demographic restructuring. What are Palestinians fearing is demographic restructuring. What are people in Kashmir worried about is ethnic cleansing. What are we talking here today is ethnic cleansing. 125 bombs over Gaza in 25 minutes. Look at the parallel. Palestinian cause is one of the oldest items on the Security Council agenda. Which is the other one, which is equally old? Kashmir. Look at the similarities.
Foreign Minister Qureshi, thank you for joining us here on TOT World.
Thank you.
And I just think it's ridiculous that the United States, of all countries, would talk about disarming what they call terrorism when they have unleashed more terror onto the world than any other nation. And I think if we're going to talk about disarming terrorism, I think Israel is a great place to start.
How many more Palestinian children have to be killed? How many more Palestinian homes have to be reduced to rubble? How many more Palestinian schools and hospitals have to be bombed before the British government takes the action necessary to finally force the Israeli government to stop its war on the Palestinian people? Surely now is the time for all UK weapons sales to Israel to be stopped. Surely now is the time for sanctions on the Israeli government for its repeated violations of international law. And surely now is the time. This House voted for it back in 2014 to recognise the state of Palestine, because Palestine has the right to exist.
To an international community is because our oppressors have been Western civilization's canonical victims. But that victimhood is not a blank check in order to oppress other people and to basically leave us as sacrificial lambs to history in order to atone to the deep violence against Jewish communities. We are in a singular struggle. We are in a struggle for all of our humanity that is mutually reinforcing and not mutually exclusive. And I am heartened to see that a number of people who wouldn't have spoken out before are speaking out because of the extent and the depth of the atrocity of Palestinians and the same propaganda that has been used to blame us for our own death. So we are breaking.
هلا بيجي يشعر
كله قتال كله صغير تعال هون
لا جماعة كل مستوى علي خافش عيطش خليك زلمة
نشأت أنا وأخي الصغير في فلسطين في مدينة الخليل القديمة. منزل عائلتنا هو نافذة تطل على مستوطنة إسرائيلية. من نقطتين للجيش على كل جانب من أسطح المنزل، شاهد المستوطنون الجنود كل حركة نقوم بها.
يعني عندهم كاميرتين بس علينا كاشفيننا كل شيء بالدار هون. هذا البيت إذا راحت نص البلد القديمة. على طول بحطوا محسوم خلص انقطع الشارع للحرم.
منذ أن تذكرت كنت دائما أحب الحمام. يمكن أن يذهب الحمام إلى أي مكان يريده.
هنقولهم عشان هون ما نفوتهم بيعرفوش يطيروا ولا شيء.
They did something, we need to show them to the officer over there, hold the key. Now, or I will come at night and I will arrest everybody in the house. Okay? يلا.
أنا بحكي معك أنت بتقول إنك أنت شفته، لا كلامك مش مزبوط. هدول التنين بس فيش عندك غيرهم.
ياسين البطاع الشايف.
تفضل بقى. هيدا تخبري مالها؟
زي هو.
خالد. يلا بسوق. يلا بسوق. البيت.
روح لبيت.
يلا.
عيط.
روح لبيت.